So, hi all, this is my great pleasure to be with Professor Neil Stewart, and this is sequential to his great talk in our DEB seminar. So if you have not watched the talk yet, I encourage you to look at it. It's also on our website and on the YouTube. And we'll go straight forward to the first question. So, Neil, can you please explain us your finding regarding the attention utility to an undergrad student from unrelated field?
Thank you so much for inviting me to come along. I appreciate that. So the work that we did is about what we call attention utility, which will mean nothing to an undergraduate from an unrelated field. So here we go. Let's have a try. Suppose you've bought a stock, like you can buy shares in Google or a big bank or a mining company, but you buy some shares and you have a portfolio of stocks and shares, perhaps, so you bought quite a few. And you hear that the FTSE 100, if you live in the UK, perhaps, or maybe if you're in the US, it's the information about the Dow Jones or the S&P 500, or these indices, they tell you sort of how well the stock market's doing generally. You hear it's gone up and you think, well, that's good news. If the stock market's gone up generally, probably the value of the things in my portfolio has gone up, right? So you think, I'm logging into my portfolio to have a look at how much it's worth. So you go onto the website for the stockbroker and you log in and you're expecting good news. And when you log in, you can see, yeah, because you hold some of the stocks that are in these market indices, and they, the market index went up, it's pretty likely you'll get good news that your stocks have gone up. So in that case, you're happy to log in, but perhaps the market index has gone down, and you think, well, if the market index has gone down, probably the value of my portfolio has gone down too. That would be bad news. So you just sort of don't look. You just sort of put it off till tomorrow, or maybe tomorrow you put it off till the next day, and for some reason you just haven't looked because you don't really want to log in and see what the bad news is. Now, in this case, there's sort of two things going on there. One is you're sort of avoiding good or bad news. But the other one is that by logging in and paying attention to your portfolio, you can learn something new. So the market index went up and you're expecting good news. And when you log in and look at your portfolio, you can see just how good that news is. You can see exactly how much money you've made by holding these stocks and shares. So to that end, you paying attention to your portfolio has both delivered you a bit of good news and it's delivered you some new information that you didn't know before, right? But the case that we're looking at is the case where actually what you learn about, instead of it being a market index, you learn about the particular stock you hold. So let's suppose you hold shares in Alphabet, sort of the Google parent company, and you hear that the share price has gone up by 10%. Well, you don't need to log into your portfolio to know that you're going to see good news about that share, because you're going to see that it's gone up by 10%, right? You're not learning anything new, but nonetheless, you're still more likely to log in and have a look. Whereas if you hear that the share price has gone down, say 10% for Alphabet, well, you don't need to log into your portfolio to see that the share price your holding has gone down by 10% because you're holding Alphabet, right? You already know what's happened to Alphabet. You don't need any new information. But still, we find that people want to log in when the news is good and they don't want to log in when the news is bad. And the idea here is that the decision to log in is partly driven by your ability to just sort of favor the good news. So if you've made a bit of money, it's just like you log into your bank account to look at your money if you've got lots of money. If you haven't got much money, you just avoid logging into your bank account because it's only going to make you unhappy. Even if you know exactly how much money you've got, you're just going to not look, right? Or know how much money you haven't got, you're just going to not look. So attention utility is the idea that over and above, it's the idea that you can get utility, or you could call it enjoyment or well-being or some other, satisfaction. But you can get that not from learning new information which you already know, but simply from savoring information you already know. It's the same reason why you might put a photograph of your family on the shelf. Presumably, well, hopefully you like your family. You already know you've got a family. You already know them. But it's nice to be reminded about them in the moment, and that makes those moments better. You get a bit of utility from it. So it's the same sort of utility that you might get from, enjoying a beautiful painting or a work of art. It's just you already know all about it. You've already seen it hundreds of times before, but it's pleasurable to look at it. So that's what this project's about. And in particular, it's about what happens to a person's attention when they're learning good or bad news about their money, or when they're simply savoring good or bad news about their money. And what we see is that if you hear that your stock has done badly, of course, you avoid logging in to look at it because you don't want to relive the bad news. But then, of course, you're avoiding your portfolio, and so you don't do any subsequent trading. So not only is there a sort of, this attention utility idea and helps to make predictions about when people will pay attention to something and when they won't, but it also sort of has a knock-on effect of if you don't pay attention to something, then you're not going to take any actions about it either. And that then goes on, has sort of knock-on consequences for your future financial well-being. In other words, if things are going badly and you avoid reliving that bad news, you're going to avoid taking any actions to fix it. I think that was a long answer, but hopefully might be useful for an undergraduate.
No, it was actually not a long answer, and it was actually, I think, a great answer for an undergraduate, and even I was able to understand it. I think it's very intuitive what you're saying, so it's very relevant to this
Well,
case.
sorry, I'm leaning in here because secretly at some level, I wonder whether to an undergraduate from another field, they'd be like, well, of course people don't want to look at stuff that's bad news. Like, they don't want to learn bad news, and they certainly they don't want to relive it, which is sort of what this project's about. Of course, that's true. And I guess what's interesting is that here we've shown, yeah, indeed that is true. Perhaps that's not so. Like if I told this to my mum, she'd be like, yeah, that's not that surprising. But what we've done here, using the data set that we have, which is this big data set of, we can see when people log into their account, and we can see all the information about their account. So with a data set like that, we can see all the trades that they make. So with a data set like that, you can identify this phenomenon really, really cleanly. One of the things we did was take the people who log in on a Saturday and look and see what they do on the Sunday. Now, on the Saturday, they learn about their portfolio when they log in, but the markets are closed. So there's no movements in their portfolio before Sunday. So when they log in on Sunday, they're not going to see anything different. And they know that. But still, they're much more likely to log in on the Sunday if their stocks they bought recently are doing really well. So we can see really, really cleanly. It's a really nice, clean example that economists like, where we've got a really good scenario in which to test out this idea that people are logging in or avoiding logging in purely to savor or avoid information they already know.
Yes, I think it's very interesting. As I said, it's very relevant to these days when the market crashed a few days ago and went up yesterday, I think, and the day, don't remember if the day before yesterday.
I'll be honest, I decided not to log in and have a look at my portfolio, my modest portfolio. But did I do that, or did I do that because I wrote this paper? I think I did it just because I don't really want to see, right? I don't want to relive bad news.
That's interesting. I have to admit, I think I do exactly what you say because I can look at my portfolio, like on my stocks in the Yahoo Finance, not advertising it, just saying, and then I know more or less how much money or I'm winning or losing, and then I have the decision whatever to enter to my actual portfolio. So I do think if I reflect on my own behavior, I do exactly as you say. So I enter more when I know that I'm going to be positively reinforced than negatively reinforced.
Yeah, yeah,
And this is very, I think the surprising finding about what you say is the fact that even when I know the outcome, I'm still more willing to enter it when to look at it when it's reinforcing or when it's a good news rather than when it's a bad news.
I think you can see this, although that's not what our particular study's about, but in people's memories, we tend to choose to remember nice things. And we'll even put all sorts of reminders about those things around us, like photographs of family holidays, for example. And we tend to choose not to remember bad things. And in fact, we deliberately don't have reminders of those things around us, um, on a day-to-day basis. In other words, we're strategically setting our environment up to make it easier for us to relive stuff we already know that was good and avoid reliving stuff that we already know that was bad.
Yes, and by the way, I think about academic example when you get an acceptance letter, then you basically have nothing new to learn probably, but still you read it very carefully. And but when you get a rejection letter, I think at least some of us prefer to to look at it briefly or put it on a side for as long as possible. Although, from rationality point of view, you should do exactly the opposite because you have feedback, you have something to learn from this rejection letter.
And possibly even some actions to take. So I think this is related to procrastinating about dealing with bad outcomes, right?
Yes, I agree with you. Okay, so let's move forward. How can your research findings be extended, especially in the domain of decision from experience, in your opinion?
Yeah. So one of the um, one of the sort of puzzles is that this is in the domain of finance, is that people tend to hold, if they have any savings, they tend to hold them as cash and they tend not to invest them. Um, Even though historically, if you hold investments, in the long run, they tend to outperform holding cash. And that's because inflation sort of erodes away the value of cash, whereas investments tend to outperform inflation and protect you from that. But at the same time, if people do invest their money, they tend to invest it in a small number of stocks and not necessarily diversify it in a fund that has all sorts of different things in it. So ideally, if you hold a very well diversified portfolio, for example, you'd hold a little bit of every single stock on the stock market, and then you would be very well diversified away from the idiosyncratic risk that you'd be exposed if you just held, say, shares in Alphabet. So, in other words, people tend to be very risk averse in the sense that they hold cash rather than invest. But when they do invest, they tend to be really risk seeking by only holding one stock instead of spreading their risk over lots and lots of stocks. So those two things are sort of a puzzle, and I think it's a bit related here. So one of the things I'm interested in is how do people learn to diversify away from holding in one single stock when they start investing to holding a portfolio of stocks, or perhaps doing that by buying some kind of fund, which is already effectively the fund has already bought shares of all of the stocks on the stock market. So you buy a little bit of the fund, you've effectively bought a perfectly diversified portfolio. So here's the idea, right, that if things are going well, you tend to invest more money. And when you invest that extra money, we can see that this is work that we're thinking about at the moment, we can see that you invest it in things that are different to the things you already hold. So you might hold a tech stock like Alphabet, but then you might go away and invest in, can't think of any other stocks now, mining stocks, for example. So you might invest in an industry in some completely different sector. Um, on the other hand, if the stock you're holding, your tech stock's done badly, when new money goes into the portfolio, you weirdly tend to be reluctant to try something different. And you tend to stick with what you know and buy more tech stocks. So I think understanding how, and you can think of it as like a sort of an animal exploring its environment, right? It goes over here and it gets burned. So it just comes back to where it was. It goes over here, gets bad news, gets burned, gets chased, gets eaten, comes back over here, and it stays where it is. Whereas if things are going well, the animal will sort of go out and explore and take risks. So understanding how this attention utility might be a mechanism which causes people to either explore financially and diversify their portfolio, which is generally considered a good thing, or whether actually possibly bad experiences cause you to be very cautious and just stay with what you know, which would lead to you not diversifying. I think that's an interesting way forward for this, is to try and understand the role of attention in how people take these financial decisions.
Oh, thanks. So it's kind of somewhat related to the hot stove effect in a sense, or not exactly?
Yeah, well, it's
More
sort of, it's,
friendly.
a decision from experience type setup. I guess it's, you've got a chain of explore or exploit decisions that you
Hmm.
take, each one contingent on your past history. So the hot stove effect would be the one where, I don't know, which one is it? Gambler's fallacy is the one where you think a run of events can't continue.
Hmm.
A hot stove effect is one way I think where you think the run of events can continue. Are that the right way round, or am I thinking about? I keep thinking about basketball for some reason here.
Um, I'm not sure basketball. I'm thinking about like something. Maybe hot stuff is not that related because you don't in the hot stuff you don't get feedbacks. This is the idea. You
Mm.
don't see when things go good, but in your case you can get the positive feedback if things do go good. I think in a sense.
Yeah, in the short term, actually, the feedback you have from holding individual stocks, often decisions from experience, in the traditional paradigm, you take a choice, you get some immediate feedback, and then it's done, right? Whereas
Yes.
in this investment case, you take lots of choices and you get lots of feedback, but it's not done. If you carry on holding that stock and buy a new one, you're going to get feedback on the original decision you took. The stock price will continue to evolve and so on. Yeah, so I think understanding how people's attention causes them to engage or disengage from a particular domain or explore in that domain and try out other options. It's sort of hitting that explore exploit theme from decision from experience, isn't it?
And the tough question, maybe you don't have an answer, which is also completely fine. Do you have a suggestion how to improve people's behavior in this sense? Like how to make them diversify more, perhaps using somewhat directing their attention maybe to the right things? I'm just hand waving here.
No, that's a good question. Um, got a whole load of things going on in my mind here. If you
Hmm.
do have enough money to save some money,
Hmm.
um, the problem is on lots of the platforms that you can go on. Uh, I mean, for example, there's lots of apps available on your phone now which have kind of gamified investing in stocks and shares and so on, or trading in futures or some other quite risky assets. Um, and of course, the apps. I always worry when you invest, right? The payoff you get from investing is unrelated to the payoff that the person providing you with the platform gets from your investing. So when you invest some money, if I put £100 into a particular stock, the platform will keep like £1 of it. They don't take a fraction of the money that I make, right? They take a
Yeah.
fraction of the capital that I put in. And that suggests to me that if they thought I would make lots of money, they might take a fraction of the money that I made, and I might be happier with that because I'm not having to pay up front. Whereas actually they take a fraction of my capital, which maybe suggests they think I'm not going to make that much money. But what it means is every time you do a trade or something like that, there's a fraction of your capital gets spent effectively on covering the fees for the platform. So I think there's a lot to be done in terms of designing products that help people invest sensibly, which is basically put some money in a well-diversified product and then don't move it around and don't touch and don't even look. So, I'm a behavioral scientist, so I'm living the dream. For my reasonably modest portfolio, I deliberately have not installed the app on my phone
Hmm.
so that I don't look, right? And so the decision to put more money in is kind of deliberately, I insulate myself from um, looking at my own portfolio to take that decision, right? And also it encourages me not to do anything like move money around in the portfolio and so on, because I have to outperform the cost of selling and buying in terms of the commissions that I pay on the platform. Um, so I think if I were giving people advice, I would be like, try and choose the platform which lets you invest for the long term and hold in a well-diversified product with the lowest fee that you can possibly pay for it.
I
Is that
think
what
this
you
is
asked? That wasn't quite what you asked, right? Looking at, I've accidentally handed out some random investment advice there, haven't I?
no, but this is a great advice. I think it can be very helpful for a lot of people. Uh, and by the way, speaking about the platforms incentives, unless they are very questionable, I recalled all these forex companies which basically bet against you. So if you make some bet on the values of some currency,
Yeah,
they usually put the other bet around. So they are very invested in your decision, but in the other way. So they want you to lose money.
yeah. I can't comment on particular companies, I guess. I have a suspicion that's probably not that legal.
Yes, it's better not to comment on specific companies,
Yeah,
but yes, there are some questionable companies.
I think it's not great. I'm starting to sound a bit like an economist, but if you think of your own incentive versus the incentive of the company of the platform you're using, if their incentives are very different to your incentives, you've got to wonder whether the platform they've created is one that's acting for your best interests or is acting for their best interests. Um,
Completely agree with you.
yeah. So I think platforms that encourage very frequent trading, for example, are probably not a good idea for long-term investors. And if
Completely,
you're a really short-term investor, you're basically gambling.
completely agree with you. Okay, so now let's move on from your research to a more broad questions. So, what is, in your opinion, the most pressing issue in the social sciences, in the social science nowadays?
Um, like you were kind enough to give me these questions a little bit ahead of time, so I had a wee bit of a thought thinking about this. And I guess as someone in a business school, we're trying to do research, but research that has applications in uh, shaping public policy and also in terms of practice, helping firms and so on do better. And you think, well, what are the really big challenges that society faces that and then I thought, well, what are the ones I actually know a little bit about in the sense that I've had some interaction with it? I think I'm working on a couple of things at the moment that I think are quite big challenges. So one of them is here at Warwick, we have an institute for global pandemic planning, which is a collaboration between some of us as behavioral scientists. We've got mathematicians who do models of epidemiology, and we've got clinicians from the medical school. And one of the things I'm quite interested in is how can we bring insights from behavioral science into those models of the epidemiological models. They're called SIR models and models in a similar domain. These are models where you have lots of individual people and they start off not infected and then they get infected and then they recover. And the probability that you yourself get infected is related to what the people around you are doing in these models and sorts of differential equations and stuff. But how can we bring behavior, human behavior into that? And in particular, one of the things I'm interested in is how can we use really large data sets, things like mobile phone locations or checking your current account bank transaction data. How can we use those models? How can we use those data, which are kind of records of human behavior? They can tell you, and if you can get it plumbed in right, you can pretty much know in real time where everybody is or what people are spending their money on. How can you use those kind of data to help improve our ability to deal with modeling out pandemics and or even considering public policy interventions like locking people down and getting them to stay at home? And I think that's there's a role for behavioral science among a whole load of disciplines in trying to help us prepare for the next pandemic and have, for example, have some of those data assets to hand and ready to go so that we can use them rather than have to assemble them because we don't get much warning when a pandemic emerges. But also to try not to prepare for the last pandemic. I mean, COVID was pretty bad, but there are other pandemics that we could have had that would have been much worse. And some countries did quite well in their responses, and other countries did not so well. And I think being a bit more prepared to deal with those, that in principle could make a really big contribution. So it's a sort of research investment in the future, but we don't quite know whether we're going to need it or not. But I guess the amount of money and effort we spend on planning for a pandemic is pretty small in comparison to the cost of a pandemic. So I think it's something that we should do. So that's one issue that is a sort of pretty pressing issue for social science. And then the other one I've been thinking about is the increases in inequality and why that's happening and what we can do about that. And we've been able to look and see. I think we're in a historically the world we've been in where there hasn't been huge inequality since the Great Depression, I suppose. The years after that, inequality was reasonably low. I think that was maybe historically that, you know, in my readings on the subject matter, that's a bit of a blip. And I think historically, inequality has normally been very high, with a very small number of people having all of the assets and the power, and everybody else having almost nothing. And it looks like bit by bit, we're moving back into a state of higher and higher inequality, where a small number of people hold all of the assets and power, and everybody else is struggling to get by. So I think understanding how that's happening and sort of the behavioral science consequences of that, and then maybe thinking about what can we do about it as well. I think that's quite a pressing issue for society. And I haven't mentioned any of the other important stuff, like I guess climate change would be another big one. Conflict would be another big one. And they're, of course, they're all a bit related, aren't they? Pandemics and climate change and conflict would be, you know, they're all going to feed into inequality and vice versa.
Yes, I agree with you. Speaking about inequality, just a hand waving, going back to your research about investing. So if I own a portfolio which is worth $1 billion, so I expect to get richer in a year by more than a person with a portfolio of $100,000 will be in his own or entire life. So this is one simple explanation for why those who are very rich exponentially get richer, because the economy is growing generally.
Yes. There's also an argument that I've seen made where so I don't know, if you have $1 billion, so there's some people with $1 billion, right? The passive income you'll get from that if you've invested it, so you get 5% returns. I think that's $1 billion. How much is that a year? That's 1,000. That's going to be $50 million
Yes.
a year of income from doing nothing. Right. So I reckon if I worked really hard, I could probably spend 5. Right. You know, buy a really nice house, buy a really nice car, go on lots of holidays, drink as much, you know, coffee as I wanted, total party time the whole time. I've still got $45 million left over, right?
Yeah.
What am I going to do with that money? Well, I'm probably going to invest it. I'm going to save it because there's nothing else to do with it. What am I going to do? Well, I might invest it in terms of investing it in businesses that make things. But I'm probably going to buy more assets with it, which will push up asset prices, which will mean people struggle. People who don't have really high passive incomes will really struggle to ever afford to acquire assets, like houses, for example. So rising inequality is, and also, you know, as inequality rises, people at the bottom end have got less and less disposable income to spend on stuff or doing things, which means the investment opportunities aren't there for people who make stuff or provide opportunities for people to do things, which means there won't be jobs in those things. And it means no one's going to put money into investing in those things because there's nobody to buy those products and services. So what will they do with the money? Buy assets. And so inequality is sort of, it feels like it's sort of set the default state of the world is for inequality to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow through a sort of feedback loop. And so understanding how as inequality rises, what that means for people's behavior and their well-being and all that kind of stuff, I think is really interesting. But also it's interesting to think about what we might do to intervene in such a feedback loop.
Sounds like a serious issue which we have to solve, otherwise we will be in great problems. So maybe a related question. What is your vision for our community for, let's say, 10 years from now? But you can pick a different number if you prefer.
I think it'll be more and more, and this is a sort of weak prediction, right? But I think, so one of the nice bits about the job I do now is that we get to hire really smart young people, right? And they're really, really smart and doing really, really exciting work. And one of the things I've noticed if we're sort of thinking in the sort of, decisions from experience type domain, which is, I guess, our theme for the conversation, but they're sort of getting information, getting data from all sorts of places outside of perhaps laboratory experiments on students coming in and pressing buttons on the computer screen. And so they're routinely working with these very large data sets or, in quite novel scenarios or doing really cool field experiments or, getting into industry and doing their studies in a really interesting sort of real world setting. I think as a sort of, vision for the community, I think that will become more and more routine. We'll see papers being published with those kind of, either based on very large data assets of, that just get routinely recorded, like, everything somebody buys from a supermarket gets recorded by the till. And it's, just there as an asset to be mined. Or we'll see people going in to those sorts of settings and running their experiments in those sorts of contexts. I think that's interesting because I think, you end up with lots of real world challenges and problems that you can try and solve alongside the sort of theoretical push forward, which you can also get from the laboratory experiments. So I think perhaps my vision would be to see that as becoming sort of, pretty much routine for studying the kinds of problems we started off thinking about in these laboratory experiments.
That's kind of a vision that I have to admit I really like. I hope
it's also quite cool to go out into the real world. Turns out they've got really hard problems to solve, and it's really good fun. But as I say, the sort of the young people we've hired recently are just doing this routinely, whereas for me it's still a bit of a novelty.
You are also young, I have to admit.
Don't tell me, I'm not that young. I'm going to be. We are really close to my 50th birthday, so.
Oh, okay. Well, not tell anybody. So you look perfect.
We won't tell anyone, right?
Guess that you're close to your 50th birthday. So, a tough question. What is the most impressive finding from the last 10 years, in your opinion?
And I've got to be honest, I struggled with that one. I struggled with that question because you showed me them slightly in advance, and I was like, what am I going to say to that? I'm not sure I still know what to say to that, other than surely I've read loads of really cool papers and, lots of work where I think, crikey, I wish I'd done that. That's really neat and really cool. But have we seen, and maybe this is, sort of physics envy or something like that, but have we seen a discovery that's sort of, earth-shattering for all of behavioral science and has really, really changed everything we do in behavioral science? I don't know that we have. So then I was thinking, well, what really has changed in the last 10 years? Maybe slightly longer. The only one I could really put my finger on is think, well, the replication crisis has had a pretty big impact on the way we do. Like if I had to put my finger on, what's changed the most? Well, probably, the arrival of new sources of data. That's changed quite a bit. And I thought, well, maybe there are new approaches to mathematical modeling, Bayesian estimations and that kind of thing. Well, probably not. Probably the replication crisis might be the biggest sort of change to day-to-day life as a behavioral scientist. And I'm not sure I'm very happy with that answer because it suggests, it suggests something about the field, doesn't it? That have I just got physics envy, that maybe it's not as cumulative as I would like, or maybe I've just got physics ignorance. Maybe physics isn't as cumulative as we think it is either. And it makes you think, if we had to, I think in a domain like physics, there's a sense in which you have to learn some stuff first. And then once you've learned that, you can learn more stuff second. But there's a sort of ordering in which you have to learn stuff. You can't learn later stuff without learning the earlier stuff. I'm not sure we've got such a cumulative build-up of knowledge in behavioral science yet. And maybe that's fine because, physics has got, I think how much, of the order of hundreds of years more
Yes,
more
definitely.
more history than behavioral science. So maybe that's fine for a science that's much younger. On the upside, I think the replication crisis has been really useful. I think it's put us on a firmer footing going forwards. And as we're quite young, there's still loads out there for grabs. I think loads of interesting stuff to do. Where we can make a contribution. So I'll try and be optimistic and finish on that. But that was what I really should have done was go back and look at all of the other interviews to see what everybody else said. I'm going to go and do that. I'm going to draw inspiration from you can plug all of the others in the footer, can't we?
That's a great idea, but I want to emphasize one point that is, I think, very important in what you say. So perhaps we are doing something maybe wrong, or we are in kind of a crisis if there are no, or if we cannot think of some very impressive findings from the last, let's say, some years. And I have to admit,
Well,
some
I'll probably be
other
kicking
people.
myself as soon as we finish talking because why didn't I say X or something like that? But yeah, I kind of want to ask this is unfair asking you a question, but yeah, what's the coolest answer you've had so far to that question that's better than this rather lousy answer?
You're asking me a tough question. I'm not sure I remember from the top of my mind, but people answered about the artificial intelligence um, things and about uh, machine learning. I think this is the answers that people generally gave. Uh, Obviously, this is not the only answer, but some people really struggled with this question. Actually, many people struggled with this question as you struggle. So it's not easy to find something
Yeah,
really
I'm
impressive.
not quite as pessimistic but I know we talked with Edo it must be a few years ago now, but about putting psychological models up against sort of black box AI approaches in prediction tournaments, for example, and it turns out that they can do quite well. And the worry would be that with very large data sets available, these models will outperform our psychological models. And I'm not quite so worried about that because I think some of the features and things we describe, I guess there's the interest in prediction, but I think prediction isn't the only thing we're trying to do. We're also trying to understand something about the causality of what goes on. And I think that's tougher to do with a purely sort of AI approach at the moment. So I think
But
there's still a place for us to do some cool behavioral science.
that's definitely right. But do you think good predictions will help us get a better understanding?
Science is supposed to be all about making testable predictions and then going out and testing them. But I think to generate those tests, it's really helpful to have some understanding of the causality around what's going on, rather than just be able to make really good predictions, right? So I think, well, I've slightly lost what you were asking me now, but I think just being able to make good predictions isn't enough for us to make progress in behavioral science, I don't think. I think we also need theory and testing those theories.
That's very interesting point. I cannot say that I completely agree with you, but I definitely, this is very interesting. What is your advice for young scholar as a very accomplished one? What would you suggest us or them? Us, I think.
What is your advice for young scholars? It's tough. I was once giving it must have been a Spudham summer school, I think, um, advice where I explained that sort of being a young academic, it being an older academic as well. It's a bit like being repeatedly punched in the face every day for no reason, and you just have to sort of get up and carry on, get up and carry on, get up and carry on. And I think there's God, this is going to be a reference that will miss most people, but there was a movie called Fight Club. It must have been from the late 1990s. And first of all, you're not supposed to talk about Fight Club, but I'm not in Fight Club, so I can talk about Fight Club. But the to get into Fight Club, you would go and stand by the door of the club, and every day they would walk past you and ignore you, or perhaps ridicule you on the way in and ignore you. And then the character in the movie, played by Meatloaf, who's brilliant, he just got up and walked off and sort of gave up. And one of the people going into the club just sort of took him to one side and said, carry on standing here. Right, carry on. And eventually he was admitted to Fight Club. Can't remember how it ended now, but Meatloaf anyway. Anyway, a bit of resilience, I think. We talked earlier about getting the bad news in the rejection letters. You just have to soak them up. Get up and carry on. Get up and carry on. So a bit resilience, I think, and it's much easier to be resilient when if you ask the people around you who've been doing it for a wee bit longer, they'll tell you all of the horror stories they've had. The things that the reviewers wrote about them. I had one not that long ago actually, which said that, and this wasn't an anonymous submission, right? But it said that. So I had my name on the front of it. It said the paper could do with some input from someone with expertise in psychology. That's harsh. That's pretty harsh. I got a PhD in psychology. I thought I was okay at this, but I think a bit of resilience in carrying on. And I think also you've got to aim high and take the rejection, which is part of where the resilience comes from, right? And then the other thing is, you were kind enough to say that I'd done all right. I think I've got a combination of I did work quite hard, and I'm sort of smart enough, but also being a bit lucky helps as well. So that's not really good advice to tell people to be lucky, but I think, and you see this with entrepreneurs, that they attribute all of their tremendous success to themselves. But I think actually being successful also has a lot of sort of outside external factors as noise that might help or hinder you. So be lucky early on. Not helpful advice, sorry.
No, I think both of your advice are so great and so helpful. I cannot relate more to both of them because your first advice, I think it's a really great advice, not only in academia, but generally in life. And I can summarize it as never accept no as an answer. It's
Keep
just
going. Yeah.
the first suggestion or something like that. So yeah, I think it's super important in life. And I have to admit that I completely agree with you with the second advice about being lucky, but I do
Not
not
really
agree
anything
with
anyone
you.
can do anything about. But
No, this is the part that I do not agree with you. I think you can do a lot about it, and it goes again back to the resilience because I believe that speaking about the inequality and equality, I do believe that people get the same spread of luck, but the difference is that some people try enough times to get their
oh
luck,
yeah,
and
for sure.
some do not try enough. So if you're resilient enough and if you try enough, you eventually will get lucky. And I think it's also related to another very important issue of being modest. So if it's not always about you, it's also about external factors, which you summarize as luck. Yeah. So I think both of
Yeah,
them are
that's true.
really
I mean, one of the things I've really benefited from is being in an environment where the people around me know the rules of the game and were generous enough with their time to help me understand the rules of the game too. Um, there's definitely that. The other one is that I think, if I look around at, some of the people I've co-authored with, who I think, crikey, that's just, that's unattainably awesome level of academic performance that I'll never get to. I mean, that's true, but they still have the same fraction of rejections that I do. But they've got a a broader pipeline of projects going on at any one time. And so they basically, like the portfolio advice earlier on, they've spread their risk over multiple projects. And it was years ago, but I decided I would always start to worry. I wouldn't worry about the rejections, but I would worry if the breadth of the pipeline of things, the number of promising projects I had going on at any one time, if that didn't look good, then you are in trouble. So I think roll with the punches, as it were, but you've got to make sure that the pipeline's in a reasonable shape.
The law of large numbers, kind of.
Well, they can't be too large, otherwise you'll never finish anything. But they can't be too small, otherwise, a few bits of bad luck will kill it all off. So.
Yes, I agree with you. So tell me, please, as someone who has been at Warwick Business School, I think for well over 25 years, why should one become a graduate student here?
Yeah,
or
I came to the
undergraduate
psychology
student?
department. Oh, why should someone become a graduate student here or an undergraduate here? I've not actually been at Warwick. I've been at Warwick for that long. I came to Warwick in 1997 to do a PhD, which I did with Nick Chater and Evan Height. And then I spent a lot of time, traveling up and down to London, drinking coffee and trying to work with people in industry and public policy. And the business school is a pretty natural environment. Plus, midlife crisis, need a change of scene and all that. So I've been at the business school for about 6 or 7 years now. What to say? Warwick is a curious place in that it's a pretty good university and it's really, really excellent at behavioral science and behavioral economics because we've got loads and loads of behavioral scientists and behavioral economists. A sort of critical mass is built up here. That wasn't really true when I was a PhD student. I started out in the world of cognitive psychology and psychophysics, where Warwick was also pretty strong. As a graduate student, I didn't realize at the time how important it is to be in the right environment. Right? I didn't know what the best journals were to try and publish in, but luckily all the people around me did know what the best journals were to publish in, and they were doing that work. And that means they're sort of doing, there is the work that they're doing is setting the direction for the field, right? And I didn't realize how important it was to be around people who are doing that. It's absolutely critical to be around people who are doing that. And so in a sense, I got very lucky with my choice of coming to Warwick. So I think, find a place where the work that you enjoy doing is being done at sort of internationally leading level. And, perhaps graduate students less naive than me will have already done that homework, but really try and work out if you want to do work in that field, who are the best people in that field, and then go try and work in a place where there's preferably many of them. And weirdly, that doesn't always mean the absolute best university in the world, but we're weirdly spread out across lots of different institutions, aren't we? There's that. And then the other thing is, I thought of the culture here, the environment here at Warwick is a pretty good one. We don't really spend all our time fighting one another. It's actually quite a nice place to work where hopefully, and one of the things I'm working on now is sort of in the role I'm in at the moment, is trying to make the research culture really the very best culture it can be. It's really pretty good, but sort of, in a spirit of continuous improvement. So you want to try and be in the place where the culture around you is a positive one, where people will take the time to explain the rules of the game to you or have a coffee with you and you explain your terrible idea to them, and then they tidy it up a bit during the coffee and you go away and you think, well, I'll do that idea instead. It's much better than the one I started with. But being in an environment where you've got that around you, it's quite intangible, but basically an environment where you're lucky enough to have pretty decent human beings all around you who are all pretty good citizens. Yeah, that's why you should come to Warwick.
I was privileged to be once in the Warwick University, and I have to admit, it's a very nice place, and you have great faculty there. So I do agree with you.
I'm really, really lucky to be here, definitely.
I have to agree with you. Completely unrelated question. Which book would you recommend us to read?
Oh, crikey. Crikey. I mean, what have I been? I've mostly just been really reading papers recently. What book would I really push people to read? Hmm. I don't have a really great suggestion. I don't have one. We should edit this bit out and put in a really great suggestion. What would I really want people to read? Yeah, that's a good question, isn't it? You know, this is a moment for sort of self-reflection on myself. Why aren't I reading that great book right now? Why am I not reading it right this instant? Um, yeah, completely outside. What am I reading at the moment? I'm actually reading a book by Afua Hirsch about the experience of coming to understanding her own ethnicity and the way that that means she's treated. She's been treated as she's grown up. The book's called British, but it's about her coming to terms with her identity, her ethnic identity inside Britain, and what that means for her. And it's actually, I don't know if you can tell from the video, right? But I'm basically a middle-aged white man. And I think having that perspective on how somebody else's life is very, very different, and the pluses that that brings, but the challenges that brings, I think hopefully is going to be useful for me in building a research environment that's a bit more inclusive of all of the people in it. So there we
Talking
are. That's
about
my suggestion.
inequality, in a sense, I assume it's somewhat
Well,
related.
yeah, I just think the right psychology as an undergraduate here at Warwick, when I was back in 1997, I was during my PhD, I was so I studied natural sciences in Cambridge, and when I studied psychology there, it was about 50-50 male female. And it took me a while to realize that's because you start out on a natural science degree, and then you can specialize in experimental psychology, which meant that the base rate of males was so high that by the time you got to psychology, it sort of balanced out at 50-50. Um, Here at Warwick, it was about 90-10 female, but the faculty was 50-50 with, and I think, I don't remember off the top of my head, but counting it up, the most senior people in the department were all middle-aged white men. Something's happened there that that needs to be fixed. And so I think that's got to in part be about the environment that we're building, you know, and the culture that we have around that in terms of making sure everybody's included. Um, so yeah, I do care about that quite a bit actually. Um, and the chap just through the wall to me, who's the pro dean for faculty, one of the projects that we worked on as a school that he led was getting the school through our Athena Swan Gold award, which was about making sure that we're on a sort of journey as an institution towards addressing the EDI issues that we need to address. And I think we can address them as a school, but also I think there's elements to that in the research that we can choose to do as behavioral scientists. I guess we can get away from weird populations and study more diverse populations. But we can also study those issues. So some of my colleagues study those sorts of issues directly. Chap called Reggio Mudjak has done a series of really nice experiments. I think the paper's called The Colour of a Free Ride, well worth a read. And that's a really lovely field experiment where he sends out actors of different ethnicities to try and blag a free bus ride to measure the disparity. Do I mean disparity? What's the word I'm looking for? The disproportionality that they face in terms of getting free bus rides. I did a piece of work looking at stop and search, although I think in the States it's called stop and frisk. I don't know what you would call it, but it's where the police stop you in the street and they can search you. And it's true that in the UK, as well as other countries, that young black people and young Asian people are much more likely to be stopped and searched than young white people. And you might ask why that is and what you could do about it. And so the research that we did was to find out that for young Asian people, they're much more likely to be stopped because the areas in which they are policed more. And so if the police go there and stop someone, then they're going to be stopping more Asian people. They don't go to areas that are more white. For young Black people, that matters. In other words, the areas where there are lots of young Black people are over policed. But also, even taking that into account, it seems that there's an individual bias inside the officer to be more likely to stop and search a young Black person than a young white person. And so what that means is that the typical way of addressing this would be some kind of unconscious bias training, where and there are various programs you can do, but of course that's not going to work. We can train all of the officers for the disproportionality in the stops and searches of young Black people. That would fix about half of the problem. But the other half of the problem and the problem in terms of stop and search for young Asian people, they would be fixed by that because they weren't caused by individual officer bias in the first place. They were caused by the deployment decisions that the organization took. So I think trying to understand how those issues, and we can use behavioral science to try and help us understand those things and try and address those issues in the real world. Now we've gone way outside decision from experience there as a topic, but sort of behavioral science wise, maybe we can do some of that work to try and make things a wee bit better.
Okay, thank you so much. We're approaching our last question, and I have to admit this is a tough one. Are you prepared?
I don't know what the last question is. I haven't got that one on my little cheat sheet that
Yes,
you sent me
but
in
you will
advance.
find out in 1 second. And as you told us before, as a secret, you're approaching your 50s and you look really great. So what is your secret? That was the secret, how to be in a great shape.
Possibly dodgy phone camera and a filter. That's probably what's done it. I think it's actually really important to take the time out to look after your physical and mental health as an academic. When you're young, I do remember I would pull, 60-hour weeks for many weeks in a row where, what's that, 10 hours a day for 6 days a week. You can sustain that in the short term and when you're young, but I don't think you can sustain that for a whole career, right? And so I took decisions. So first of all, get lucky with your health. That's certainly going to help. Get lucky, be in a good environment, but take the time out to look after your mental health. For me, looking after my mental health actually means looking after my physical health. It means I try to go outside every day and cycle or run or swim. And even though the diary gets filled up and it's crazy busy, I decided I will never be too busy to take the time to do that, because otherwise, I wouldn't be able to function as an academic, I don't think. So I don't know. You certainly don't need random advice from me and my midlife crisis on this kind of thing. But I think if you at all can do it, take the time to get outside and enjoy just being outside and doing some kind of physical activity while you're there as a bonus, I think.
So do sports. This is what you suggest us.
Well, I don't know. I've never really done any sports where at school I was hopeless, right? I was always the last kid to be picked for the football team. And so,
But
that kind of stuff. It
swimming
put
is
me off for
sport,
life.
or
But
running, or cycling.
yeah,
It's all sport.
me and the dog are a pretty good team for running. So value the people around you, enjoy being with them, and keep active and get outside.
Okay, I will try to implement your suggestion. Neil, thank you so much.
I'm the least qualified person for that one at all. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Fascinating. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Take care. See you soon.